Shalom and welcome to Temple Talk. This is Yitzhak Ruvain speaking to you from south of Jerusalem here in the land of Israel. Today is the 24th day of the month of Sivan 5783. It's June 13th, 2023. This coming Shabbat we read Parashat Korach. We, meaning we here in the Holy Land, we here in the land of Israel, because we are still 1 week ahead of the diaspora reading schedule due to the 2-day Shavuot celebration in the diaspora a few weeks ago. We only celebrate Shavuot 1 day here in the land of Israel. And since the second day of Shavuot fell on a Shabbat, it threw off the reading in the diaspora, and they're 1 week behind. But next week, while we here in Israel will be reading Parashat Chukat, which, by the way, is the Parashat that tells us all about the Para Aduma, the red heifer. You people who are listening, who are in the diaspora, will be reading a double Parsha, Parsha Mechuberet. You'll be reading Korach, the Parsha that we're reading this Shabbat, plus Chukat together, which is a tall order because they're two very serious Parshiot, and they deal with very, very different subjects. There's a real, the Para Aduma, the red heifer, which comes up at the very beginning of Parshat Chukat, is almost like the antidote for everything we'll be reading about in Korach, because Korach really is sort of the, if we thought we couldn't fall any further than we did in Parashat Shalach with the spies, things seem to only be getting worse here in Parashat Korach. But before we talk about Korach, I want to remind everyone that this coming Shabbat is also Shabbat Mavarachin, meaning it is the Shabbat that we make a blessing in anticipation of the upcoming new month, Rosh Chodesh of Tammuz, which begins. It's a 2-day Rosh Chodesh, and a 2-day Rosh Chodesh always means that the first day of the Rosh Chodesh celebration falls on the last day of the concluding month, and the second day of the Rosh Chodesh celebration falls on the first day of the incoming month. And the reason for that is because of the set calendar that we hold by these days, the set Hebrew calendar, which needs a little bit of tweaking here and there, and without getting into technicalities, which I myself am a little foggy on, sometimes that leads to a 2-day Rosh Chodesh, and Rosh Chodesh Tammuz this year will be Sunday night Monday and Monday night Tuesday. And of course, the month of Tammuz is the month that the 12 spies that we read about last Shabbat first entered into the land of Israel. And they were in the land of Israel for the entire month of Tammuz, and of course returned the following month of Av, on the 9th of Av. And if that rings any bells, well, it's correct, because we're talking about Tisha B'Av, and of course their report, their Dibata Aretz, their evil report about the land of Israel, which they delivered on the 9th, very much so, put a whammy on that date for the nation of Israel, for the Jewish people throughout all our history. And of course the first and second holy temples were both destroyed on the 9th, and of course the 9th, many other calamities also happened on the 9th, and of course the 9th is a full 25-hour fast day that will continue to fast until we've rebuilt the Holy Temple. And of course, it's the conclusion also of a 3-week period of mourning, which begins on the 17th of Tammuz, which has its own reasons for being also a dawn to dusk fast day. But we'll talk all about that in the upcoming weeks. No need to rush into the 3-week period. No need to rush into Tammuz. We still have another week of Sivan, and much to talk about before we get to the 3 weeks. This Parashat Korach I'm sure you're familiar with the Parsha. You're familiar with Korach. He was a Levite. He was a cousin of Moshe and Aharon. And he got it in his head that he was just as good as them, and why can't he be a Kohen? Why can't he be the high priest? Why can't he be running things? Who are these people, Moshe and Aharon? Who appointed them? And he was a demagogue. He was a populist and a smooth talker. And he gathered people around him in the name of democracy. Well, what about us? We're all equal here. We're all holy. Who made you holier than us? Well, the fact is that, as with every smooth-talking demagogue, some of what he says is completely true. We're all holy. And nobody actually made Moshe and Aaron holier than anyone else, but Hashem, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, God, appointed them to run things. And he is the authority that gave them their authority. And that really is what Korach is arguing against. And our sages talk about this at great length. And they describe Korach as a very wealthy man, and B, as being a very brilliant man, and creating all these Talmudic, halachic arguments to try to embarrass Moshe and Aaron, to try to frustrate them, to try to top them, to outwit them. And kudos to Korach for his brilliant insights, but unfortunately they were all for the wrong cause. They were the cause for I, me, and mine. They were the cause of ego. He was a power-hungry person. He was a Levite. He had status. He had prestige. He was a wealthy man. He had all that he needed. And he was of the family of Kahat, of the Levite family of Kahat. And we know that the family of Kahat, we learned earlier in the book of Numbers, were the Levites who actually carried the sacred vessels from encampment to encampment every time the cloud of glory lifted up, and it was a sign for Israel to move on. The family of Kahat would gather up the sacred vessels, cover them with blankets of techelet, of the pure blue, and with skins, etc., to protect them and to keep them hidden from the eyes of the Israelites, and transport them. And among these sacred vessels, of course, was the Aron Habrit, the Ark of the Covenant, and it was the Ark of the Covenant that Korach had the unique, distinct, historical privilege of carrying, of bearing from place to place. He and others. It wasn't a one-man job, of course. And yet that wasn't enough for him. He wanted more. And why now? Well, I think to understand why now, we have to refer back again to last week's Parashat, Shlach. Shlach lecha. Send for yourself 12 spies, 12 men. Actually, they're never called spies in the Parashat of Shalach, in the reading of Shalach. They're actually 12 notables, 12 men of stature from each of the 12 tribes, and send them into Canaan. And of course, they came back with the evil report, which caused the spirits of the entire nation to just drop like a lead ball into the ocean. And the people rebelled and said, let's go back to Egypt. Moshe, you've led us astray. You've said you're going to lead us to a land of milk and honey, and you've led us to our death in the wilderness. And so Hashem, indignant that Israel should turn their backs on the gift of the land, the promise of the land, he said, okay, if that's the way you feel, you will die in the wilderness and only your children will enter. So we have now a generation of malcontents who have no future. They're going to die in the wilderness. And they're not going into the land. So, they left Egypt, they left slavery, they received the Torah, they received the manna, the nourishment from Hashem's table every day for breakfast, dinner, and breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And they weren't willing to take the next step, which was to basically grow up, enter the land, become independent. Just like children have to grow up, leave their parents' table, and make it on their own, become independent. And at the first sight, it seems, of that prospect, at least 10 of the 12 notables who went into the land for 40 days said, no thanks. We prefer our life here in the wilderness. And only 2, those being, of course, Caleb ben Yefuna, Caleb, and Joshua ben Nun, Joshua, they were the only 2 who said, what are you talking about? God promised us, and if he promised us, it means we can do it. And it's a beautiful land. It doesn't get better than this. And of course, they ultimately would be the only 2 of their generation to actually enter into the land. Anyway, now that the people have been embittered, now that the people are crestfallen, now that the people have no future, now is a time for a man like Korach to strike. Why not? Right? He can create a narrative. He can create fake news that Moshe brought them into the wilderness to die, that Moshe never really knew what he was doing. And all his promises have come to naught. So why shouldn't I be in charge? And the whole thing about we're all holy, and why can't we be the Kohanim? Why can't we be the priests? And he got behind him some people from the tribe of Reuven, because Reuven is the Bechor, the firstborn of all the sons of Yaakov, of Israel. And before the institution of the Levite tribe as being the Kohanim, the Kohanim would be from the tribe of Reuven. So maybe now's their chance to take back what they believe belongs to them. And so he created this story in order to gather around him followers, in order so he could crown himself, really. He had no intention of sharing the spoils with anyone else but himself. And we know what the continuation of the story is. We know the aftermath. We know that there was no reasoning with him. And Moshe, when we read the language that he uses, Moshe really treated him with disdain, because Moshe saw right through this from the very beginning. There was no sincere intention behind any of his words, except, I want to be you. I want to replace you, Moshe. I want to replace you, Aharon. And of course, we know that the earth will swallow them up. Korach and his 250 followers swallow them up in an instant, never to be heard from again, although the Midrash tells us that if you go to a certain place in the desert and put your ear to the ground where they were swallowed up, you can still hear Korach saying to this day, Moshe and his Torah are the truth. Right? Basically, to this day, he is admitting that he was wrong, and that Moshe and the Torah are the truth. He wasn't rebelling simply against Moshe or simply against Aharon. He was rebelling against the entire Torah, and he was rebelling against Hashem. So in that way, he really was a heretic, an atheist, maybe we could even call him. But he paid the price. And, of course, that's not the end of the woes that Israel faces in this Parsha, in the Parashat Korach. But before we talk more, I want to read the first few lines from the Parasha. And again, I don't know if I mentioned earlier, but Parashat Korach begins in Numbers chapter 16, verse 1, concludes Numbers chapter 18, verse 32, and we'll read the first verse or two, maybe three in Hebrew, and then in English. Vayikach Korach ben Yitzhar ben Kahat ben Levi v'Datan v'Aviram b'nei Eliav v'On ben Pelet b'nei Reuven Vayakumu lifnei Moshe v'Anashim מבני ישראל 50 ו200 נשיאי עדה קריאי מועד אנשי שם ויקהלו על משה ועל אהרון ויאמרו עליהם רב לכם כי כל העדה כולם קדושים ובתוכם השם ומדוע תתנשאו על קהל השם וישמע משה ויפול על פניו. Okay, Kahat, son of Yitzchar, son of Kahat, son of Levi, separated himself with Datan and Aviram, sons of Eliav, and On, son of Pelet, the offspring of Reuven. They stood before Moshe with 250 men from the children of Israel, leaders of the assembly, those summoned for meeting, men of renown. They gathered together against Moshe and against Aaron and said to them, "It is too much for you. For the entire assembly, all of them are holy, and Hashem is among them. Why do you exalt yourselves over the congregation of Hashem?" Moshe heard and fell on his face. Okay. As strong as that sounds in English, in Hebrew it's even more harif, it's even more strong. Because the first word of the first verse is not Korach as it is in English, but it's Vayikach, which means and he took. And that just describes Korach to a T. He was a taker. He took. He took what he wanted. Vayikach Korach, and then it lists his name, and the men who were with him. As I said before, people from the tribe of Reuven. And then it says, Vayukumu lifnei, second verse, in English, but they stood before Moshe, but in Hebrew it's Vayukumu, which means they rose up. They rose up before Moshe. So already we're getting the sense that there's they didn't approach Moshe in order to ask a question. They rose up before Moshe in the spirit of rebellion. Anshe Shem, they're men of renown, people of name, literally. Vaikhalu al Moshe, they assembled. Again, it doesn't say lifnei Moshe in Hebrew, before Moshe, it says al, above. So basically they're a threatening crowd, right? They have not come to have an open discussion. They are gathering up against Moshe in a threatening fashion. And then they say, again, the English is, "It is too much for you," which almost sounds like in English like they're saying, share some of your burden. No, that's not what they're saying at all. In Hebrew, it is Rav Lechem. Rav Lechem, which again can be translated as too much for you, but its intent is you've taken too much. You're big shots. You've taken more than you should have. It's it's in the tone of accusation. It's accusatory. It's not simply allow us to relieve you of some of your burden. Not, we want to share your responsibilities. We want to help. No, it's we want to take from you. And then it says, Kulam K'dushim, we're all holy, Ubatocham Hashem, and Hashem is with them. V'madua titnasu ala kahal, exalt yourselves. Titnasu has a much nastier intonation even than exalt yourself. It's like, who do you think you are, raising yourself up over everybody else? Someone who is mitnaseh is someone who is arrogant. In modern Hebrew, arrogance. And he says, he's accusing them of arrogance. Again, Moshe has expressed many times he would be happy to be relieved of the burden of leadership. But Hashem has called upon Moshe to lead, and Hashem will not let Moshe step down. Nothing he would like more than to be able to retire, but that's not what he's being offered here. So Moshe, very, very cleverly and quick thinking, comes up with the idea of a contest, as it were. Moshe heard and fell on his face. He spoke to Korach and his entire assembly, saying, in the morning Hashem will make known the one whom is his own, and the Holy One, and he will draw him close to himself, and whoever he will choose he will draw close to himself. Do this. Take for yourselves fire pans, Korach and his entire assembly, and put fire in them and place incense upon them before Hashem tomorrow. Then the man whom Hashem will choose, he is the Holy One. It is too much for you, O offspring of Levi. So he's using it's too much for you, Rav Lechem. He's throwing back at Kahat the exact language that Kahat, the accusatory language that Kahat had directed toward Moshe. So Moshe basically, he's ready for a fight. We saw in the past 3 parshiot now, including Korach, the breakdown of the Israelite society began with the complainers who came up with reasons to complain when there was nothing to complain about, when everything seemed to be running perfectly smoothly. Then, of course, the people who wanted meat. And then it was the spies. Then, of course, amidst all this was again the confrontation between Miriam and Aharon and Moshe, which was most unfortunate, and seems to have had its negative ramifications. I mean, perhaps people saw that, if Miriam and Aharon can challenge Moshe, well, then why can't we? So things have just been going from bad to worse, and again, every time you think it can't get any worse, it seems to get a little bit worse. I find all this to be super relevant to the events happening in Israel today. Today meaning right now. As you, I'm sure, know that Israel had elections about half a year ago, and a new government was elected into office that led by Benjamin Netanyahu, and with his party, the Likud, and with 2 ultra-Orthodox parties, and with a national religious party, meaning it is a right-wing party with a tremendous religious influence, input, and interest and concern. And from the minute that they won the election, an assembly of present-day Korachs decided they were going to try to bring down the government by not simply mass protest, but, as they've described very clearly, by civil disobedience and using words beyond civil disobedience, that soldiers and Air Force pilots will not report to their bases, will not report to duty, and that people shouldn't pay taxes, and they've been blocking major highways, trying to close down Israel's main international airport. Horrible things, and they claim they're doing it in the name of democracy. That's the beauty, right? Just like Korach claimed to be doing it in the name of democracy. Basically, why can't we have a say in things? Why can't we have a vote? We're also holy? Who made you better than us? In the case of Israel in the year 2023, nobody's saying anybody's better than us. At least the people in government aren't. They're simply saying we were elected, and we were elected on a certain platform with certain values, and those are the issues and values that we intend to promote. And the people who lost the election, I should say a minority of the people who lost the election, a very small minority actually, but a very powerful group of Anshe Shem, right? Men of renown are leading this attempted insurrection. And it's not a one-day January 6th insurrection that's happening in Israel. It's been happening for months now. And former prime ministers, prime ministers of shame, I should say, former prime ministers who have gone down in infamy for their past actions, are the ones leading this insurrection. And I mean the former Prime Minister Ehud Olmert, who spent time in jail for corruption. Former Prime Minister Ehud Barak, who was the Prime Minister of Israel when the Second Intifada broke out, and basically proved completely incapable of countering the murderous violence. And so he did not last long in office. And so these two failed prime ministers and other failed military men, failed as military men and failed as politicians, are all part of the leadership of this basically attempt to overthrow an democratically elected government. And they're saying that the government is saying horrible things. I don't want to repeat the things they say about the government. Horrible things that have absolutely no basis in reality. And the government is attempting to follow through on policies that it promised its voters, and that the majority of the people in Israel voted for. And so these well-connected rebels, these men of renown, who are very well connected also in American circles and in American political circles, and have rallied the Biden administration behind their cause. So basically we have an American administration which is hostile to the elected government of Israel, and they're all doing their darndest to try to create havoc. They've made very serious attempts, and with some success, in trying to cause the Israeli economy to founder and collapse. And they threatened the same with the Israeli defense. I mean, it's disgusting. But they're basically saying, we didn't get our way, and we don't like what the people of Israel voted for, so we're going to bring everything down with us. And I guess then they assume that they'll be in charge. Like Korach, they'll be in charge. So may the earth swallow up all these insolent people who believe that it's their way or the highway. And believe me, they have nothing to offer. They have no alternative recipe for anything. They just want to remain in power. They're part of an old established elite, or people who at least consider themselves to be the elite, and they see themselves as being very modern, very Western, very secular, and so everything that this government stands for, they find repulsive and repugnant, as in the land of Israel, as in the Torah of Israel, as in traditions of Israel, Jewish traditions, as in family, as in nation. And these people who I can't even call protesters anymore, the people leading this. I know there are many protesters who believe that, who are very sincere and believe that things that they hold dear are at stake. I don't think that's the case. I think they've been, their minds have been poisoned by propaganda, which of course has been greatly inflamed by, you guessed it, by local media and also overseas media. So if you're trying to find out what's really going on here, you'll need some filters, because much of the overseas media and even overseas politicians and governments are playing along with this attempted insurrection. And I can only hope that it dies soon and dies completely, and that the people leading it will get their just desserts, which really should be, they should all be brought in and investigated, certainly interrogated, and charges should be brought against them, which were the methods of their protests and their civil disobedience and their actions, which have been very violent, were they being exercised, conducted by a different segment of the population here, those people would all be in jail, whether they were minors or adults or whatever. They would all be in jail, and probably be in jail till they had to go before the judge, without mercy, without consideration, because it's happened, and it happens still today. So these people are indeed a privileged class, because the law doesn't seem to apply to them in the same way that it applies to others. But they are today's Korach and his band of 250 know-it-alls, people who want to seize power and are willing to tell the more naive populace anything they want to hear in order to get them behind them. And of course, they are swallowed up by the earth. But even when that was done, things didn't settle down. We know there's a plague broke out, and then we have the famous passage where Moshe instructs Aharon to take the incense censer, the Ketoret incense, and to actually basically walk right into the jaws of death, and with the incense, and thusly putting an end to the plague. And we've posted about that in our Facebook page this week, and about the power of the temple incense known as Ketoret. Yes, it stopped a plague. Yes, it can bring us many good things, and which is why we, as part of our prayer service each day, morning and afternoon, we recite actually 3 times the instructions, the ingredients of the Ketoret, because it brings us blessing. I hear the music. Wow, I was not ready for that. So much more to say, but not enough time. Thank you so much for being with me. Temple Talk.